البرزنتيشن الجايه احنا معانا ضيف من بره فانا هبريزنت بس بالانجليزي. The next session is called Think Like an Attacker. The presenter is Avinash Advani, a Vice President of Business Strategy at StarLink. Please, Avinash, come and join us.
Thank you, Ahmed. Assalamu alaikum. So that's the only two words that I can speak of Arabic. So I'm going to make this presentation English today. I hope that's okay with everybody. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Avinash. I am the VP of Business Strategy at StarLink. And it's my pleasure to be here today. So thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk to you about a really interesting topic. It's going to be less technical than some of the presentations that you saw earlier, but it's extremely important in the world of cybersecurity. And the concept is think like an attacker. The only way you can truly defend yourself is by thinking like an attacker with proactive, predictive, advanced threat protection. So very quickly, for those of you that don't know who we are, we've been around for 10 years. Actually, this is our 10-year anniversary. And we have a lot of customers around the region, across the Middle East, Turkey, Africa, Egypt. We have 10 offices around the world, including one here in Cairo. And I believe many of you know our Egypt team. And we also work with 250 partners across the region. So here you can see our 10 offices. We also have an office in the US. We, as a business model, StarLink is a trusted security advisor. We help customers understand their security roadmap and help them achieve that roadmap through partners around the region. That's why we are a VAD, or a value-added distributor. If you look at the kind of customers that are using our technologies today in the region, you'll see that all the major banks, telecom companies, energy companies, oil and gas, and of course government are using at least one of StarLink's technologies. In terms of what makes us a trusted security advisor, what is being an advisor? Being an advisor is taking the best of breed security technologies and bringing it into region. So before any of these technologies existed in the Middle East, Turkey, Africa region, we were the ones who actually brought it here. I've chosen not to mention product names, but I'm talking about before these vendors were even in region. We actually looked at these technologies and understood how important they are for security. So, on to the topic. For those of you that know the RSA conference in San Francisco, this year, the president of RSA, he made a statement, he made a quote. He said, 2014 was the year of the mega breach. 2015 may well as be known as the year of the super mega breach. This is just an indication of how cybersecurity is becoming more important and how the number of breaches are becoming larger and larger. PwC, one of the top 4 consulting companies in the world, last year said 42.8 million incidents translated to 117,000 incoming attacks every single day. In comparison, in the same study, reported only 3.4 million in 2009. So you can see how rapidly breaches are taking place and how the relevance of cybersecurity is critical. It's a bit difficult to look at this slide and understand what this says, but really this is to show you that last year and this year, it's exactly the same. The type of breaches that impacted organizations is everything you can possibly imagine. From insider threat to SQL injections, to DDoS, to malware, to brute force attacks. But it's important not to look at the type of attack, but really how many and the size of those attacks. This is just a sample to show you that it spans every single spectrum of cybersecurity. If you look at the industries that were impacted by breaches last year and this year, you'll see that every single industry you can possibly think of was impacted. Breaches and targeted attacks and advanced threats do not only impact certain industries, they impact everybody. So this slide, again, you don't need to look into it in too much detail, except every single industry was impacted by a breach last year. There's an organization globally called IANS. They did a cybersecurity user concern survey. Just very quickly to look at this, there are a couple of important points to take away. What is the impact of a data breach? So customers around the world say the main impact is, of course, data loss. The second one is the business stops. The third is it impacts the company's reputation. And of course, some companies lose revenue. And in terms of what the cyber threats that happen, what they actually impact is financial crime, fraud, insider threats, state-sponsored threats. And when customers were asked, what technology should I put in place to protect myself? You'll see that a lot of them were talking about next-generation firewalls. Some were talking about advanced malware protection. Some were saying endpoint security. And others were still saying firewall and IDS. But the problem is that to protect against next-generation threats, there is only one way. To think like an attacker. Because if you can't think like an attacker, you can't defend these attacks. There's this guy who wrote, I think most of you probably heard of this guy before. His name is Sun Tzu. Long time ago. He wrote a book called The Art of War. And cybersecurity today is war. He has a very important comment that directly applies to cybersecurity. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but you do not know the enemy, for every victory that you win, you will also suffer a defeat. If you do not know the enemy or yourself, you will lose in every battle. So this statement around the art of war is extremely important to think about as you're planning your cybersecurity solutions and your deployments. Why? So, today, what is the state of the IT security landscape? People are always focused on detection and response, which is good. But this is defensive. This is defending the attack. What's the problem with this? The problem with this is that this is reactive, which means it happens after the incident happens. And that's always a problem, because by that point, there's already some sort of damage that's taken place. So what people have a desire to do is to reduce the detection time and the response time by being able to analyze the data that they have today so that they can detect and analyze in order to respond quickly. So that graph, that picture I showed you a couple of minutes ago with the different type of attacks, that still holds true today. Now, the good news is, a lot of the existing tools you have, next generation firewalls, IPS, they can be stopped. These threats can be stopped by those tools. But those are called traditional threats. The other thing is, some organizations today have not experienced a breach. They don't know that a next generation threat has attacked them. So they think that their existing tools, they're sufficient. They work for them today. I'm fine with my existing tools. The problem is, cyber attacks change every single day. That's why it's called a zero-day malware, a next generation threat. And they become more sophisticated, where your existing tools cannot support or address those threats. So, when you see the different threat vectors I showed you a few minutes ago, you have XSS, you've got SQL injections, you've got malware, you've got brute force, you've got DDoS. You need to make sure that you secure all your data from every single attack vector, correct? So security leaders need to think, where can these attacks come from? They need to think like an attacker. New defenses and security controls have to be put in place to protect against these threats. Now, we realize that there is no way that enterprises and governments can ever be at the same pace of the cyber attacker. It's not possible. It's impossible. But at least you can be prepared. One more important quote. This came out from actually a couple of years ago from the Verizon breach report. This happened, they release this every year. I'm going to read it and then I'll explain it. Some interpret attack difficulty as synonymous with the skill of the attacker. And while there is some truth to that, it almost certainly reveals much more about the skill and readiness of the defender. All this is saying is the following. That people believe when an attack happens, this attacker is really good. But actually, it's not. It's about how weak the defense is. So, what steps can be done? Step 1, know your enemy. Who are the attackers? Why are they targeting your organization? What techniques do they use to gain unauthorized access to your organization or launch destructive attempts to take data out of your organization? Such as DDoS, like you'll be hearing about next. Everybody knows that the reason that breaches happen today is because there are criminals, there are political activists, there are hackers, and unfortunately, also insiders that are creating these threats. So, first step, expect to be a target. You are a target. There is no such thing as absolute security. You cannot protect yourself completely. It's important that you look at the attacks that come in. I'm sure everyone has a SIM or a logging solution, and if you don't, you need to get one, because it's crucial to be able to analyze these different tools to see how that attack is happening, where it's coming from. This is really going to help you deploy the proper protection. Step 2, know yourself. What do the attackers want from you? Of course, most attackers come in and they target large organizations and big government entities. But small and medium enterprises are also attacked because it's these firms who are used to conduct more attacks. So attacks happen to everybody. So, the goal is here not to be reactive, but proactive. Right? The problem is, today, you see detect, and then you respond. This is reactive, and therefore there's a higher risk. But if you can predict, if you can say, this is where the attack's going to come from, then you can prevent it from happening. And that's proactive security. This has a much lower risk profile. So how do you think like an attacker? Well, obviously you need to implement the right protection measures to secure your critical assets. Wherever your data is, you need to put the controls in place to protect that data. You need to look at all the log data and the analysis and the sources and the types of attacks and put it all together to see where can I strengthen my controls to protect the company. You need to look at threat intelligence. Threat intelligence, every single vendor today provides some form of threat intelligence. But threat intelligence is not only from Symantec, Cisco, RSA, all the vendors that do security. But it's also your own threat intelligence. What intelligence do you have internally that you can collect and be able to use it to put better controls in place? Are my databases being impacted? Are my DNS servers being impacted? Are my file servers being impacted? Wherever you're seeing those attacks, the controls need to be in place. You need to make sure that you have a very strong incident response program so that you can quickly bring back your organization in case an attack comes into place. You need to have continuous monitoring so that you're constantly scanning all the environment to know, is this control working? Is someone trying to get in here? If you don't have visibility all the time, you will not be able to detect an attack in advance. And the third point, I think, is probably the most important: security awareness. Now, everybody in this room is, of course, security aware, which is great. But what about the rest of your organization? Without having effective security awareness, it is almost impossible to protect your users from third-party external threats. And of course, today, cybersecurity is not just a security level. It's a board-level decision. The management and the board need to be aware of what's going on in order to help you invest in the right tools. So, how to think like an attacker? Protect against the most likely threats, of course. Identify the attack paths. Where can the attacker come in from in order to access your business assets? Have visibility into the attack paths. Try to simulate the behavior of a real attack. How can you simulate the behavior of a real attack? Well, if I know this is where the attack's going to go, and this is where it's going to come from, I can test and validate that attack path to make sure that the attacker cannot come in. Obviously, you need to prioritize critical patches to all the key areas when you know that there are holes in those areas. When you have continuous monitoring, you will know this area needs to be patched. If not, it is going to be an attack path. And when you have greater knowledge of the attacker because of the analysis you do, you will also know the behavior of how they perform those attacks. And in the end, what's the benefit? You will spend less time reacting and responding to incidents. So, if you were to look at this in a single picture, what does this look like? We call it the extensible attack intelligence platform. There's no vendors mentioned here on purpose because this can be done with a whole variety of vendors. What's important to look at is you've got your SIM or your logging capability that feeds in all the alerts around security. You've got GRC. GRC stands for, as you all know, governance, risk, and compliance. Every single security tool provides a form of GRC. Take that data, understand the value of the assets, and of course, continuous monitoring is called vulnerability data. You take all these three together, and this is called the integration framework. Once you have all this data, you can then do analysis. You can see this is where the data is. I know where my data is. Is my data at risk? Yes or no? Can I protect this data from a next generation threat? Yes or no? When this data is shared, is it shared securely? And then, once you gather the data, you can do risk analysis on the data. You can validate and test, is that attack path real or is it fake? Can the attacker come in? And then I can get reports. I can go to the CEO or the board and say, sir, ma'am, here you go. Our environment is protected. And even if someone attacks me, this is how we can actually stop it. Because you have the access to the data. And you know where the attack paths are coming from. Now, StarLink has taken the best of breed frameworks from around the world. NIST Cybersecurity Playbook, ISO, every possible framework that you can imagine. And we've created something called the security framework, the StarLink security framework. That is basically looking at all the top frameworks, including the SANS 20 critical controls, and saying what are the key areas of IT security that an organization needs to deploy in order to achieve multi-layered defense in-depth security. And what you see here in front of you is a single diagram. When you look at this, you should be able to do a gap analysis in your mind. This is where I am today. This is where I need to be tomorrow. By looking at your environment from a user, network, applications, and data perspective, you will be able to see all the security tools that could possibly prevent next-generation threats from impacting your environment. And in order to achieve this, of course, we spent the last 10 years building what we call the StarLink Solutions lifecycle. And this lifecycle that you see here in front of you, it asks you very simple questions. 4 questions. Where is my sensitive data? Access control. Is my sensitive data at risk? Risk management. Can I protect myself from next generation threats? Advanced threat protection. And how do I share my sensitive data securely? Secure mobility. And how do I tie it all together in order to do the analytics and gain intelligence on my data? We call this operational intelligence. It's not just SIM, it's not just security alerts, but it's operational intelligence. And that's how you think like an attacker. Thank you very much. So I think there's 2 other presentations that have to happen in this slot. So we'll do questions outside. If anybody has any questions about any of these solutions, we'll be at the StarLink stand during the break. Thank you very much.
البرزنتيشن كانت كويسه مثالي. لو في اسئله او اي حاجه عن لايف سايكل كامله اللي هو كان افينيش بيتكلم عليها، والبرودكت بتاعت ستار لينك اللي هي بتعمل لايف سايكل البروتكشن لايف سايكل كامله، في البوز بره موجود. وده هيحركنا للنقطه الثانيه اللي احنا كنا بنتكلم عليها، ان مش لازم يبقى سيم بس، ممكن يبقى فيها اتاكس ثانيه محتاجه بروتكشن ثاني زي ديدوس.